How you doing, guys? This is Matthias Atva from Dreadnought, your Dreadnought PS4 replay guy. It's the weekend, so instead of posting one of my awesome replays, I'm posting part 3 in a 4-part series on Dreadnought Officer Briefings. As I've stated in parts 1 and 2, officer briefings are an important part of the Dreadnought game and can give you an edge against less experienced players, but there are no substitutions for solid gameplay techniques, good teamwork, or well thought out module builds that complement your gameplay style. Officer briefings simply complement a build or play style and are not a prerequisite or necessity for doing well in Dreadnought matches. Before you go off spending hours grinding through ships you may not like to play, hoping that a single officer briefing is somehow going to turn your losing streak around, you should probably spend that time working on good basic techniques on your favorite ships. If you'd like to know some of the key basics of Dreadnought, please watch my 5 tips to becoming a better Dreadnought player on my YouTube channel, Dreadnought. Also, before grinding for briefings, I suggest you level up at least 3 different ships with decent module builds. Like rock, paper, scissors, quite often the class of ship you bring to a specific map or battle situation, or when you respawn, will help you much more than one particular officer briefing. Okay, so let's dive in. Today we're going to take a look at navigation officer briefings, how they work, how to get them, and where to find them, and how they are currently being used in the Dreadnought gameplay meta. First, let's take a look at Navigation 101. Navigation 101 is tied with Slow and Steady for my second favorite officer briefing in Dreadnought, but only because I tend to prefer ships with medium or high speed ratings. If you captain a slower ship with a maneuver or speed rating less than 35, even though Navigation 101 will still give you a modest benefit, most of the officer briefings on this list will help your game much more. Navigation 101 will add 10% to the speed of your ship at all times without condition, no matter what your health or energy levels are. Ships with a medium speed of 40 or more will really see a noticeable increase to the speed of their ship during gameplay. Ships with 60 to 80 speed rating will fly around like greased lightning. If you watch my Jupiter Arms destroyer replays, you'll often catch me dodging and outflying missile swarms or slower torpedo salvos almost like a Corvette. I use a combination of evasive maneuver, Navigation 101, and power to engines to do this. Navigation 101 is a solid and dependable briefing that will benefit all ships in all battlefield conditions. If you are unsure which officer briefings to start working on, Nav 101 is far from the worst 101 briefing, and maybe you should look to replace Communications 101 instead. That being said, if you are a Dreadnought, a slower artillery cruiser, an Akula Vector destroyer, or an Akula Tactical, there are better navigation briefings that will benefit your game much more than Navigation 101. Next, let's take a look at the only navigation officer briefing offered from the Jupiter Arms tech tree, what I consider to be the worst officer briefing in the game, Nerves of Steel, found on the Vigo Tier 4 destroyer. Words simply cannot express the soul-crushing disappointment of the most conditional and unrewarding officer briefing in Dreadnought, despite having one of the coolest names. I have a particular disdain for this briefing as it is the first non-101 briefing I purchased, and I have tried making this briefing work on many ships and many builds, only to find I was better off having used Navigation 101, and that it is orders of magnitude worse than all the other navigation briefings you have to grind to obtain. Nerves of Steel grants about a 2-second damage resistance buff of only 5% and an extremely brief 1-second boost that triples the speed of your ship, but only if you take damage from an enemy while you have power to engines. This means if you have 0 power or have power set to shields, weapons, or nothing, you receive 0 benefit from this briefing. Additionally, unless you get hit while you have power to engines, you won't go any faster. Since shields block 65 to 100% of damage received, if you are absorbing any sort of concentrated firepower, the 5% damage reduction Nerves of Steel offers is basically of no benefit, and you would survive much longer by simply putting power to shields. I think a much better alternate version of this briefing, in line with other Jupiter briefing and its tragically cool name, is to simply grant the ship a 50 or even 100% speed bonus if the hull is at 25% or less. I could go on for about 20 minutes about how this briefing is an abomination of conditions and the worst in the game, but we have limited time, so I'll just say this. Unless your goal is to obtain the incredible Athos destroyer, there is no reason whatsoever to grind for this terrible and useless officer briefing. Now, let's look at one of the best and easily attainable officer briefings in the game, Slow and Steady, found on the venerable Tier 3 Chernobog Dreadnought in the Akula Vector Research Tree. There are only 3 officer briefings available at Tier 3, and this is one of them. And not only that, I consider Slow and Steady along with Feedback Loop to be the best briefings in the Dreadnought game. Slow and Steady is so easy to grind to, has no conditions, and is perfect for slower ships. Slow and Steady grants 10% damage reductions at all times, but reduces the speed of your ship by 10%. Some detractors of this awesome ability say that it's really a 20% reduction in speed if you count having lost Navigation 101, but I think that's an unfair calculation, and to be honest, some ships are so slow that if you reduce their speed by 30% or more, no one would even notice or care. Prime examples of this are the Jutland and the Koche, who lose 2 to 3 points of speed to gain 10% damage reduction on an already very tanky ship hull. If you have replaced your Engineering 101 with another briefing, Slow and Steady is a perfect way to compensate for it. And if you are currently using Engineering 101 and equip this briefing, what little damage is getting past your shields is reduced by 16.5%, which is about 1 in every 6 damage points. By using Slow and Steady and Engineering 101 as an officer briefing combo, Akula destroyers can actually absorb and survive module-amped plasma rams. I consider this briefing to be a must-have for all dreadnoughts, including Oberon dreads. Min-max is the name of the game, and speed is often life for certain ships who want to stay away from this briefing, but even if your main is a Corvette or Vindicta, I would still grab this easily acquired officer briefing for any of the slower secondary ships you have in your arsenal. The next 2 officer briefings are from the Oberon Tech Tree. In my opinion, both of these great ship briefings are not only well worth the grind, but even if you don't use them on your main ship, they are still fantastic additions to your officer briefing collection. The first navigation briefing from the Oberon Tech Tree is Navigation Expert, found on the Tier 4 Medusa Corvette. I personally use Navigation Expert on all my Corvettes and even on my Oberon artillery cruisers. If you spend most of the match on the move, dodging enemy fire instead of absorbing it, or spend large portions of the match traveling to ambush positions to bushwhack unsuspecting prey, then Navigation Expert is a must-have briefing. Navigation Expert reduces your power consumption by 50% while you have power set to engines, but increases energy consumption by 30% while you have power set to weapons or shields. The numbers here sound a little misleading, but in layman's terms, you can have power set to engines for twice as long, but when you set power to shields or weapons, your energy bar will be depleted about 1/3 faster, which is much less than twice as fast. If you use your shields efficiently and only activate shields just before you take a large amount of damage, the effect is hardly noticeable. However, this officer briefing will drain your energy bar with power set to weapons extremely fast. So if you hardly use power to weapons and have power set to engines most of the time, this briefing will benefit you immensely. Navigation Expert pairs extremely well with Feedback Loop. If you ever watch my Corvette or Nox replays and wonder how I can move so fast for so long, staying alive and dodging enemy fire while I rack up incredible kill scores, this officer briefing combination helps make it possible. This officer briefing does not work well with module amper and often renders module amper useless. Also, if you use shields or set power to weapons for most of the match, such as with most dreadnoughts or artillery cruisers, this officer briefing isn't for you. The second navigation briefing available from the Oberon ship tree is Engine Rigger, found on the Tier 4 Vindicta class destroyer. This briefing is an interesting and powerful navigation briefing that seems excellent on paper, but in practice may throw your power usage and maneuver game all out of whack. This is an expert level briefing that requires skill and subtlety to use. Engine Rigger adds an additional 100% speed bonus while you have power set to engines, making you 3 times as fast overall, but drains your power bar almost twice as fast. However, unlike Navigation Expert, this officer briefing doesn't have any negative effects on your shields or power to weapon usage. This may be irrelevant, however, as players who use this briefing for the first time immediately notice that their energy bar decreases rapidly and they don't have power to put to weapons or shields even if they wanted or needed to. That being said, using Engine Rigger on Ram or Assault Blink War builds will have your victims thinking you either hacked the game, have an onboard cloaking device, or are the best dang warp jumper on the server. Pairing this officer briefing with engine booster or thrust amplifier will see you going 4 or even 5 times faster than normal, making even Char from Gundam jealous, but only in very short bursts of lightning speed. Also, if you are a very slow ship with an energy generator, this briefing can help you go from cover to cover or even close in for a desperate kill much faster than you thought was possible, surprising everyone on the battlefield. A word to the wise though, this briefing takes a lot of skill and practice to use, and you'll experience many desperate situations before you master this tricky briefing. Well, that concludes my review on the Dreadnought Navigation Officer Briefings. I hoped it helped you in deciding what navigation briefings you plan to grind for and which one to avoid at all costs unless you desire to experience the awesome purple pew pew rush of the Athos Destroyer. Stay tuned next week for the 4th and final officer briefing review. If you know someone who is relatively new to the game and has questions about officer briefings and you don't want to spend hours explaining it to them, please share them a link to this video. Well, that's it from me for now, and I'll see you soon in Sinley Bay.